Before the gas grills, before the store-bought marinades, there was Grandpa, standing by the smoker, apron stained, tongs in hand, and a fire that never quit. Every summer, like clockwork, he brought out the same legendary lineup. Not just food, but fire-forged tradition. The kind of BBQ that made neighbors peek over fences and cousins race to the table. The kind that filled the air with smoke, laughter, and stories you still tell. These weren't just recipes. They were rituals. They were the flavors that raised us. Today, we're firing up the memory. We're honoring the smoke, the sizzle, and the soul of American BBQ. These are 10 recipes your grandpa swore by every summer. The ones that turned backyards into family reunions and grills into altars of flavor. So grab a plate. Pull up a lawn chair, and let's remember the taste of tradition, one smoky bite at a time. 1. Barbecued sweetbreads, the delicacy Grandpa never explained, just perfected. You didn't ask what it was. You just ate it. Because when Grandpa pulled those sizzling bites off the grill, you knew better than to question the magic. Barbecued sweetbreads, not bread, not sweet, but the tender glands of beef or lamb, cleaned, marinated, and grilled until golden and crisp on the outside, buttery soft inside. It was old-school cooking. Grandpa didn't call it gourmet. He called it real food. He'd soak them in buttermilk, season them with salt, pepper, and a whisper of garlic, then toss them over hot coals until they sang with smoke. Served with grilled onions or tucked into a slice of white bread, sweetbreads were his secret weapon, the dish that made grown men nod in respect and kids wrinkle their noses until they tasted it. In the world of American BBQ, sweetbreads were the quiet flex, a nod to immigrant traditions, ranch culture, and the kind of culinary courage that only the old heads had. To eat them was to trust the fire. 2. Barbecued calf brain, the bold bite Grandpa never backed down from. This wasn't for the faint of heart. It wasn't for picky eaters or folks who needed a menu to feel safe. It was for Grandpa, the kind of man who respected every part of the animal and knew how to turn the unexpected into unforgettable. Barbecued calf brain was his quiet rebellion against waste. Cleaned with care, soaked in milk to mellow the flavor, then seasoned with salt, pepper, and a touch of paprika. Grilled gently over low heat until the outside crisped and the inside stayed creamy, almost like a smoky pâté with a backbone. He didn't serve it with fanfare. He served it with pride. Wrapped in foil, tucked into a bun, or sliced thin with grilled onions, it was a dish that made you pause and then nod in respect. In the old days, brains weren't taboo. They were treasured. Grandpa didn't cook for trends. He cooked for truth. And barbecued calf brain was his way of saying, if you're gonna grill, grill with guts. 3. Smoked deer heart, the cut that came with respect. This wasn't just meat. It was memory. It was the part of the hunt Grandpa never wasted. The heart. Smoked deer heart wasn't about showing off. It was about honoring the animal. Cleaned with care, soaked in brine, then rubbed with cracked pepper, garlic, and a touch of brown sugar. Smoked low over hickory until the outside was firm and the inside stayed tender, like steak with soul. Grandpa didn't serve it to everyone, only the ones who understood. The ones who knew that flavor comes from respect, not convenience. He'd slice it thin, lay it on a wooden board, and pass it around like communion. No sauce, no garnish, just fire, smoke, and silence. A dish that said, we don't waste, we honor. To eat it was to taste the woods, to taste the hunt, to taste the kind of summer that came with stories, not shortcuts. 4. Smoked squirrel, the backyard game. That built. You didn't find it in the grocery store. You found it in the woods, and when Grandpa came back with a few squirrels slung over his shoulder, you knew dinner was going to be different and unforgettable. Smoked squirrel wasn't just a dish. It was a rite of passage. Cleaned with care, brined overnight, then rubbed with salt, pepper, and a little sage. Laid over low hickory smoke until the meat pulled clean from the bone, tender, earthy, and kissed by fire. Grandpa didn't cook squirrel to impress anyone. He cooked it because he respected the land, because he knew how to turn what others overlooked into something worth gathering around. To eat smoked squirrel was to taste the woods, to taste the summer mornings spent in silence, to taste the kind of BBQ that came with grit, gratitude, and a whole lot of heart. 5. Barbecued sheephead, the feast of respect. This wasn't just a dish. It was a statement, a whole sheep's head, cleaned, seasoned, and laid over fire, not for shock, but for honor. Grandpa didn't flinch at the sight of it. He saw value. He saw flavor. He saw tradition. Barbecued sheephead was slow food in its truest form, rubbed with garlic, rosemary, salt, and black pepper, wrapped in foil or smoked open-faced, letting the fire kiss every curve, the cheeks, the tongue, the brain, the jaw. Each part had its own story, its own texture, its own purpose. He'd carve it like a craftsman, no waste, no rush. And when he served it, there was silence, not out of discomfort, but out of respect. To eat barbecued sheephead was to taste humility, to taste history, to taste the kind of summer that didn't need fancy, just fire, patience, and pride. 6. Smoked catfish head, the flavor that floated upstream. Grandpa didn't just fish. He respected the river, and when he caught a catfish, he used every part of it, especially the head. Smoked catfish head wasn't a throwaway, it was the treasure. The cheeks, the collar, the gelatin-rich pockets around the jaw, all packed with flavor that fillets couldn't touch. He'd clean it carefully, rub it down with salt, cayenne, and a little mustard powder, then smoke it low over pecan wood. The result? A smoky, tender, almost buttery bite that tasted like the river itself, earthy, bold, and unforgettable. Grandpa would serve it with hush puppies or spoon it over rice, bones and all. And if you were lucky, he'd let you pick the meat yourself, a quiet ritual that taught patience and respect. To taste the wisdom of a man who knew that the best bites weren't always the prettiest, but they were always worth remembering. 7. Barbecued elk tongue, the cut Grandpa called respect on a plate. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast, but when Grandpa laid that elk tongue on the grill, you knew something sacred was about to happen. Barbecued elk tongue was a dish of patience and pride. Cleaned meticulously, simmered low in broth with onions and bay leaf until tender, then peeled and rubbed with salt, cracked pepper, garlic, and a touch of smoked paprika. Finished over open flame, kissed by oak smoke until the outside charred and the inside stayed velvety soft. Grandpa didn't serve it to just anyone. He served it to those who understood the hunt, who knew that elk wasn't just meat. It was a gift from the land and the tongue. That was the storyteller's cut. He'd slice it thin, lay it on a cutting board, and pass it around like a secret. No sauce, no distractions, just fire, flavor, and respect. 8. Smoked groundhog, the backyard barbecue that followed the seasons. You didn't find it in the freezer aisle. You found it in the field. When the garden was getting chewed up and Grandpa said, "Time to earn dinner," smoked groundhog wasn't just a dish. It was a lesson in patience, in resourcefulness, in knowing how to turn nuisance into nourishment. Grandpa would clean it himself, skinning, gutting, and soaking the meat in salt water overnight to pull out the wild. Then he'd rub it down with black pepper, garlic, and a little apple cider vinegar. Wrapped in foil or laid bare over oak smoke, it cooked low and slow until the meat was fall apart tender, with a flavor somewhere between pork and rabbit. Earthy, lean, and surprisingly rich. He didn't serve it with ceremony. He served it with pride. A side of fried potatoes, maybe some greens, and always a story about how that groundhog had been eyeing his tomatoes for weeks. To eat smoked groundhog was to taste the land, to taste the rhythm of summer, to taste the kind of cooking that came from knowing your backyard better than your grocery store. It was bold. It was honest. It was Grandpa's way of saying, if you're gonna grill, grill with grit. 9. Smoked beaver tail, the frontier's forgotten delicacy. It wasn't just wild, it was wise. Because when Grandpa smoked a beaver tail, he wasn't chasing novelty. He was preserving tradition. Beaver tail was frontier food. Thick, fatty, and rich with collagen, it was prized by trappers and homesteaders who knew that flavor didn't always come from the muscle. Sometimes, it came from the marrow of the land. Grandpa would clean it meticulously, scraping the skin and trimming the edges. Then he'd brine it overnight in salt water and vinegar to mellow the wildness. Rubbed with black pepper, garlic, and a touch of maple syrup, a nod to the woods it came from. He'd smoke it low over applewood until the fat rendered and the skin crisped like pork crackling. The texture was unlike anything else. Crispy on the outside, gelatinous and savory inside, like brisket and bone marrow had a secret meeting in the smokehouse. To eat smoked beaver tail was to taste the wilderness. To taste the ingenuity of survival. To taste the kind of summer that came with grit, gratitude, and a fire that never judged, only cooked. 10. Whole barbecued hog, the fire that fed everyone. This wasn't just a meal. It was an event, a sunrise to sunset ritual that turned backyards into banquet halls and pit masters into legends. Grandpa didn't just barbecue a hog, he committed to it. He'd start before dawn, prepping the pit, stacking the wood, and seasoning every inch of that animal like it was sacred. Salt, pepper, vinegar, and smoke. No shortcuts, no secrets, just time and trust. The whole hog went on the pit, snout to tail. Shoulders, ribs, belly, hams, and jowls. Each part cooking at its own pace, each bite telling its own story. He'd tend the fire like a preacher tends a sermon, slow, steady, and full of purpose. And when it was done, the carving was a ceremony. The meat fell apart with a whisper. The skin crackled like applause. Neighbors came with empty plates and left with full hearts. In the South, whole hog barbecue wasn't just tradition, it was identity. Rooted in indigenous and African cooking practices, passed down through generations, and perfected by hands that knew how to turn fire into flavor. It was the crown jewel of Grandpa's cookout, the dish that made the smoke linger long after the fire went out. These weren't just recipes, they were rites of passage. They were the flavors that stitched summers together, one smoky bite at a time. From Squirrel to Sweetbreads, Elk Tongue to whole hog, Grandpa didn't cook for applause. He cooked for family, for memory, for the kind of love that came wrapped in foil and served with a side of storytelling. This was barbecued before the branding, before the gadgets, before the shortcuts. It was fire. It was patience. It was pride. So if this video stirred something in you, a memory, a craving, a story, hold on to it. Because the smoke may fade, but the legacy? That stays. Like this video to honor the old ways. Drop a comment. Which dish brought back a memory? Which one are you brave enough to try? Subscribe to the America We Remember, where every flame tells a story worth preserving. Until next time, keep the fire burning. And remember, the best barbecued isn't just tasted, it's felt.